Hello, cherished listeners. Welcome to a brand new adventure on our channel. Get ready to unwind and immerse yourself in a tale of courage, ancient spirits, and a battle for survival. If you enjoy our stories, please consider subscribing and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. Now, let's begin our journey. Deep within the emerald heart of the ancient forest, where colossal trees touched the sky and rivers sang lullabies to the stones, lay the secluded village of the Emberwood tribe. It was a place of profound peace, a haven built from the very breath of the jungle, where life flowed in harmony with nature's rhythm. The Emberwood people, with their skin the color of rich earth and eyes that held the wisdom of generations, lived by the old ways, honoring the spirits of the forest and the ancestors who walked before them. Their lives were simple yet deeply meaningful, marked by the rising and setting of the sun, the bounty of the hunt, and the shared warmth of communal fires. At the heart of this tranquil existence stood Kale, the youngest guardian of the tribe. His youth belied a spirit as ancient as the trees and a resolve as unyielding as the mountains. Kale was not yet an elder, his face still smooth save for the faint lines etched by sun and wind, but his shoulders already bore the weight of his people's safety. He was the protector, the silent watchman who patrolled the forest edges, ensuring no harm befell the Emberwood. His days were spent traversing tangled roots and winding paths, his senses keenly attuned to every rustle of leaf, every distant call of a bird. Kale knew the forest as intimately as his own heart, understanding its myriad voices, its hidden pathways, and its sacred places. He communed with the ancient spirits, offering silent prayers for guidance and protection, his connection to the land a palpable force. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic existence, a faint tremor of unease had begun to ripple through the tribe. It was a whisper carried on the wind, a shadow seen in the periphery of vision, a subtle dissonance in the forest's symphony. The elders, with their deep knowledge of lore and legend, spoke in hushed tones of forgotten evils, of cycles that turned slowly, imperceptibly, bringing forth ancient challenges. Kale, too, felt it a prickling sensation on his skin, a subtle shift in the forest's vibrant energy. The animals seemed more skittish, their calls tinged with an unfamiliar urgency. The air, usually thick with the scent of damp earth and blossoming flora, now sometimes carried a faint metallic tang like distant lightning. He often found himself standing at the edge of the known hunting grounds, gazing into the deeper, untamed wilderness, where the oldest trees stood like silent sentinels, guarding secrets that predated human memory. It was from these depths that the whispers seemed to emanate, ancient and chilling, promising a disruption that would test the very fiber of the Emberwood tribe. Kale knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that his days of peaceful guardianship might soon come to an end, and that the true test of his courage lay just beyond the veil of the familiar forest. The following days brought Kale no respite from the growing unease. His patrols, once a source of quiet contemplation and familiar comfort, now felt charged with an unspoken tension. He noticed the subtle shifts with a guardian-esque keen eye. The usually playful river otters were absent from their favorite sunning rocks. The vibrant forest birds sang less, their melodies replaced by an unnerving quiet. Even the deer, typically graceful and serene, moved with an unusual twitchiness, their ears constantly swiveling, searching for a threat unseen. Kale spent hours observing, becoming a silent shadow among the ancient trees, trying to decipher the forest's increasingly cryptic messages. He found patches of undergrowth trampled in ways that didn't match the passage of any known animal, too wide, too destructive, leaving behind a faint, earthy odor that was both alien and deeply unsettling. The air, which usually hummed with the symphony of insect life, was at times eerily still, as if holding its breath. One afternoon, drawn by an instinct he couldn't ignore, Kale made his way to the sacred grove, the spiritual heart of the Emberwood lands. It was a place of immense power, where the oldest trees, gnarled and majestic, formed a natural cathedral, their branches interwoven to create a perpetual twilight. Here, the ancestors were believed to dwell, and the tribe came to offer prayers, seek guidance, and connect with the profound energies of the earth. As Kale stepped into the grove, a shiver ran down his spine. The air, usually vibrant with spiritual energy, felt heavy, almost suffocating. The ancient moss-covered stones, where generations had offered their tributes, seemed to pulse with a faint, disturbing tremor. The grandest tree, the mother tree, whose roots delved deep into the earth's core, appeared to weep sap like tears. Its usually robust leaves tinged with a sickly yellow. Kale knelt, placing his hand on the mother tree's rough bark, trying to feel its pulse, to understand its distress. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his spirit, and what he felt was not the usual soothing flow of ancient wisdom, but a profound disquiet, a deep-seated fear that resonated through the very fabric of the grove. It was as if the earth itself was groaning under an unseen burden. Back in the village, the elders had also noticed the changes. Gathered around the central fire, their faces etched with concern, they spoke in hushed tones. Elder Maeve, the tribe's venerable shamaness, her eyes as deep and knowing as the forest pools, recounted dreams filled with coiling shadows and rumbling earth. "The forest," she murmured, her voice raspy with age. "She is troubled. The balance shifts. An old shadow stirs in the deep places." Other elders nodded, their expressions grim. They spoke of the ancient stories, tales whispered only when the moon was hidden. Stories of a time when the world was younger and more dangerous, when colossal beasts roamed and primal forces held sway. Kale listened, his heart heavy. The collective fear of his people, once a distant rumor, was now a tangible presence, a cold breath on the back of his neck. The peace of the Emberwood was not just threatened, it was already subtly fractured. He knew, with a dawning certainty, that whatever was disturbing the sacred grove and unsettling the forest was not merely a natural phenomenon, but something far more ancient, far more malevolent. His role as guardian was about to be tested in ways he could scarcely imagine. Driven by the growing sense of dread, Kale sought out Elder Maeve. He found her in her modest hut, surrounded by bundles of dried herbs, polished stones, and ancient carvings. The air inside was thick with the scent of sage and history. Maeve, her silver hair braided with feathers and beads, sat by a small, smoldering fire, her eyes half closed in contemplation. She looked up as Kale entered, her gaze piercing, as if she had been expecting him. "The forest speaks to you, Kale, as it speaks to me," she stated, her voice a low rustle like dry leaves. The whispers grew louder. Kale knelt before her, recounting all he had observed, the strange tracks, the animal behavior, the unsettling stillness, and the profound disquiet he had felt in the sacred grove. He spoke of the metallic tang in the air and the faint tremors that sometimes pulsed through the earth, felt only by those attuned to its rhythm. Maeve listened patiently, nodding slowly, her ancient hands tracing patterns on a smooth river stone. When he finished, she opened her eyes fully, and Kale saw a deep sadness mixed with grim resolve within them. "These are not new signs, Kale," she began, her voice taking on a storytelling cadence. "They are echoes of a time long past, a time when the world was raw and untamed. Our ancestors spoke of a being of immense power, a creature born of the earth's deepest, darkest places. They called it the Great Serpent of Shadow." Kale felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. The Great Serpent of Shadow was a legend, a bedtime story told to frighten unruly children, a mythical beast banished to the realm of myth. To hear Maeve speak of it as a tangible threat was unnerving. "But Elder," Kale ventured, "the legends say it was defeated, driven back into the earth by the combined might of the ancient tribes and the spirit guardians." Maeve sighed, a sound like wind through dry reeds. "Defeated, yes. Banished, yes. but never truly destroyed. The earth breathes, Kale. It sleeps and it wakes. And with its awakening, the old evils can stir once more. The serpent sleeps for centuries, gathering strength, waiting for the moments when the veil between worlds thins, when the balance of nature falters. She pointed to an old, weathered carving on the hut wall, depicting a colossal, scaled creature coiling around what looked like a stylized mountain, its eyes glowing malevolently. Tribal figures, small and valiant, stood against it, spears raised. The serpent, Maeve continued, feeds on fear and imbalance. It seeks to consume the life force of the forest, to plunge our lands into an eternal twilight. It represents primal chaos, Kale, a force that seeks to undo all that is gentle and ordered. Kale's heart pounded. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a rogue beast. It was a force of nature, an ancient entity of immense destructive power. The weight of his guardianship suddenly felt crushing. How could he, a mere man, stand against such a foe? What can we do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maeve looked at him, her gaze unwavering. We remember, we prepare. We trust in the wisdom of our ancestors and the strength of our spirits. And you, Kale, you must be its guardian once more. For it is written, when the serpent stirs, a guardian shall rise, bearing the mark of the emberwood, to face the shadow. Kale felt a heavy responsibility settle upon him, a mantle woven from fate and ancient prophecy. The peace of his tribe, the very essence of their existence, now rested on his shoulders. The time for whispers was over. The time for action was drawing nearer. The conversation with Elder Maeve solidified Kale's deepest fears, transforming vague anxieties into a grim, undeniable truth. The great serpent of shadow was stirring. The next few days saw the subtle signs of its awakening escalate into more tangible, alarming events. The first clear indication came from the outer hunting grounds, a bountiful region of the forest where the tribe regularly found sustenance. Hunters returned with empty hands and troubled expressions, reporting an eerie scarcity of game. The deer, the wild boar, even the swift forest fowl all seemed to have vanished, leaving behind only the unsettling quiet of an abandoned wilderness. One morning, a group of young hunters, usually boisterous and eager, rushed back to the village, their faces pale with fright. They spoke of finding a trail of destruction unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Trees were not merely felled, but appeared to have been snapped and twisted with unimaginable force, their colossal trunks splintered as if by a giant hand. The ground was churned and gouged, as if something immense had dragged itself through the earth, leaving behind a wide, shallow trench that snaked through the forest floor. Kale immediately assembled a small, seasoned scouting party. He chose his most trusted companions, Lyra, a swift and perceptive huntress with eyes like a hawk, and Rorik, a strong, silent warrior whose tracking skills were unmatched. Together, they ventured into the affected area, their senses on high alert. The scene was even more devastating than described. Where once there was lush undergrowth and vibrant life, now lay a swath of ruin. The air was heavy, thick with the scent Kale had noted before a strange, earthy, metallic tang that seemed to cling to the broken foliage. Rorik, kneeling to examine the tracks, pointed to deep indentations in the soft earth. Not a bear, he murmured, his voice low with apprehension. Too wide, too heavy, and these markings, he indicated faint, parallel grooves running along the edges of the main trench. Like scales, immense scales. Lyra, meanwhile, had climbed a partially fallen tree, scanning the canopy. Her voice, when she spoke, was tight with alarm. Look, Kale, higher up. Kale followed her gaze. High on the bark of a towering ancient tree, far above where any ordinary creature could reach, were long, deep gouges, as if something gargantuan had scraped its body against it. The sap that oozed from these wounds was dark, almost black, and gave off a faint, sickly luminescence. "It is growing," Kale whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It is moving closer." The sheer scale of the destruction was terrifying. This was not the work of a territorial beast or a hungry predator. This was a force of devastation moving with a deliberate, relentless power. The fear that had been a whisper was now a palpable presence, a cold hand squeezing the heart of the emberwood. Kel's resolve hardened further. He understood now that this was not merely about protecting the village from an external threat. It was about confronting an ancient elemental force. The vanishing trail of the forest animals, the colossal tracks, the inexplicable destruction, all pointed to one undeniable truth. The great serpent of shadow was not just stirring. It was actively asserting its presence, its immense form, carving a path through their sacred lands. The Emberwood tribe was no longer safe within its peaceful glade. The battle, Kale realized with a chilling certainty, had already begun, long before the first spear was ever raised. The return of Cal's scouting party, their faces grim and their reports chilling, cast a pall over the Emberwood village. The description of the widespread destruction, the inexplicable tracks, and the sheer scale of the presumed creature sent a shiver of fear through the community. The usual evening chatter around the fires died down, replaced by hushed conversations and anxious glances towards the deepening shadows of the forest. The tribe's children, usually full of boundless energy, clung closer to their parents, sensing the unspoken tension. Then came the tremors. They started subtly, a faint vibration underfoot that many initially dismissed as a trick of the mind or the distant rumble of thunder. But they grew in intensity, becoming undeniable shudders that rattled the foundations of the thatched huts and sent pots clattering. The first significant tremor struck during the midday meal. The ground heaved violently, sending people stumbling and scattering food. A collective gasp rose from the villagers as cracks, thin at first, spiderwebbed across the packed earth of the central plaza. Panic, a raw primal emotion, began to ripple through the crowd. Kale, standing firm amidst the chaos, instinctively moved to reassure his people. "Stay calm," he called out, his voice strong and clear despite the shaking ground. "It is the earth settling. Hold fast." He knew, however, that this was no ordinary geological event. The tremors were too rhythmic, too deliberate, almost like the slow, ponderous movement of something impossibly vast beneath the surface. Elder Maeve emerged from her hut, her face etched with a mix of fear and recognition. She stood, leaning heavily on her staff, her eyes closed as she felt the pulse of the earth. When the tremor subsided, leaving behind an unnerving silence, she opened her eyes and looked at Kale. "It breathes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The serpent writhes beneath us." Her words confirmed Cal's darkest suspicions. The tremors were not random acts of nature. They were the very movement of the great serpent, slowly, inexorably, shifting its colossal body, perhaps even burrowing closer to the heart of their lands. The realization was terrifying. How do you fight something that moves beneath your feet, that shakes the very ground you stand on? The tribe's oldest members, those whose memories stretched back through generations, began to recall ancient stories Tailies once thought to be mere myths. Old Man Boren, his voice trembling, spoke of his great-grandmother's accounts. She spoke of the earth groaning, of trees falling without wind, of the river changing its course in the span of a night. They called it the Serpent's Awakening. Fear, once an undercurrent, now surged through the village like a tidal wave. The idea of an unseen, colossal creature moving directly beneath them, threatening to shatter their homes and their lives, was almost too much to bear. Children cried, mothers clutched their little ones, and even the bravest warriors looked towards the forest with a newfound terror in their eyes. Kale understood the panic. He felt the cold grip of it himself, but he knew he could not show it. He was their guardian, their rock. He moved through the village, his presence a calming force, helping to steady frightened villagers, offering words of encouragement. He knew that the greatest battle ahead was not just against the serpent, but against the despair that threatened to consume his people. The tremors were a clear warning, a declaration of war from the ancient darkness. The Emberwood tribe was no longer just threatened. It was under siege, and the enemy was closer, far closer, than anyone had dared to imagine. The tremors became more frequent, punctuated by periods of unnatural stillness that were almost more unsettling than the shaking itself. Sleep became a luxury, stolen in short, fitful bursts, as the villagers listened anxiously for the next rumble, the next sign of the encroaching darkness. Kale, burdened by his duties, found sleep almost impossible. He spent his nights on the highest platform of the largest watchtower, a structure woven into the sturdy branches of a sentinel tree, gazing out into the inky blackness of the forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but also that strange, metallic tang, now stronger, more acrid. The moon, a thin sliver of silver, offered little illumination, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. It was during one such moonless night, the silence of the jungle unusually profound, that Kale saw it. He had been staring into the depths of the ancient trees, his eyes straining to pierce the gloom, when a movement, massive and slow, caught his attention. It wasn't a rustle of leaves or the scamper of an animal. It was a profound displacement of the very fabric of the forest. A colossal shadow, darker than the night itself, began to emerge from the dense canopy in the far distance. It was not merely a shadow cast by the moon, for the moon was barely visible. This was a living, moving darkness. It slithered, not like any snake Kale had ever seen, but like a mountain gliding across the land. Its form was immense, undulating with a terrifying grace, pushing aside trees that stood in its path as if they were mere twigs. Kel's breath hitched in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming silence. He could hear nothing, no sound of scales on earth, no groan of displaced trees, only the faint rhythmic thumping of his own blood in his ears. The creature moved with an unnatural stealth, its bulk defying its silence. As it moved, a faint sickly green luminescence seemed to emanate from its form, highlighting the impossible width of its body, the sheer, unimaginable length of it as it disappeared behind another rise of trees, only to reappear moments later further along the forest edge. It was the great serpent of shadow, undeniable, terrifyingly real. It was larger, more ancient, more formidable than any legend could adequately describe. The scales, even from this distance, seemed to absorb the light, making it a moving void in the darkness. Its presence radiated an ancient, primal malevolence that Kale felt deep in his bones, a cold dread that seeped into his very spirit. He watched, transfixed, as the colossal shadow slowly, majestically, moved along the distant ridge, tracing a path that brought it ever closer to the Emberwood lands. Each undulation of its monstrous body seemed to send a subtle tremor through the earth, a faint echo of the quakes that had plagued the village. The sight confirmed everything Maeve had spoken of, every fearful whisper of the elders. This was no myth, no fading legend. This was a living, breathing harbinger of destruction, an ancient force awakened to reclaim its dominion. Kale remained on the watchtower long after the shadow had vanished into the deeper forest, swallowed by the darkness from which it had come. His hands gripped the rough-hewn railing, knuckles white. Fear still gnawed at him, a cold, persistent ache, but it was now tempered by fierce, unyielding resolve. He had seen the enemy. He had faced its terrifying reality. The time for passive watchfulness was over. The time for preparation for battle had truly begun. The Emberwood tribe would not fall without a fight, not while Kyle, its guardian, still drew breath. The first rays of dawn found Kale descending from the watchtower, his face etched with exhaustion, but his eyes burning with a fierce determination. He immediately sought out Elder Maeve and the other tribal elders, their meeting place being the large communal hut, the Heartwood Lodge. The air inside was thick with the smell of morning fire and nervous anticipation. The elders were already gathered, their faces grim, discussions hushed. The tremors of the night had been particularly strong, and the metallic scent of the serpent was now faintly discernible even within the village boundaries. As Kale entered, all eyes turned to him, recognizing the gravity in his silent presence. "I saw it," Kale stated, his voice low but clear, cutting through the tension like a sharpened blade. "The great serpent. It moved along the eastern ridge last night. It is real. It is immense. And it is closer than we imagined." A collective gasp rippled through the council. Despite Maeve's warnings and the mounting evidence, the direct confirmation, spoken with such conviction by their guardian, struck a chord of profound fear. Some elders covered their mouths, others bowed their heads in silent despair. Elder Theron, a venerable warrior with scars that told tales of countless battles, pounded his staff on the ground. "Impossible. The legends speak of it banished, locked away. It cannot simply return." "The earth breathes Theron," Maeve interjected, her voice calm but firm. "And with its breath, the ancient things stir. Kale has seen the truth. His spirit is pure, his vision unclouded." She looked at Kale, her eyes communicating deep understanding. "Tell them, Guardian. Tell them what you truly felt, not just what you saw." Kale took a deep breath, steadying his resolve. "It is not merely a beast, elders. It is a force. A living, ancient power that seeks to consume. Its presence brings a cold dread, a profound imbalance to the forest. It shattered trees without effort. It moved with a silent, terrifying grace. Our traditional defenses, our hunting spears, they will not suffice." He spoke of the sheer scale of the creature, the deep gouges in the trees, the devastating path it carved, and the overwhelming sense of malevolence it exuded. He emphasized that this was a threat unlike any the Emberwood tribe had ever faced, a challenge that demanded more than just their courage. It demanded their unified will, their ancient wisdom, and perhaps a new kind of weapon. The council members listened, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to a dawning, terrifying understanding. Theron, initially defiant, now sat in stunned silence, his knuckles white around his staff. The weight of Cal's words, coupled with Maeve's unwavering support and the escalating signs, broke through their disbelief. "So, what then, Guardian?" asked Elder Anya, her voice trembling slightly. "Do we flee? Do we abandon our ancestral lands?" Kale met her gaze, his own resolute. "We do not flee. We are the Emberwood. This is our home. We stand, but we must prepare. We must understand. Maeve has spoken of old lore, of ways to fight this darkness. We must delve into those forgotten paths." After a long, tense silence, Elder Theron finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. "He is right. The signs are too many, the testimony too clear. This is not a matter for debate, but for survival. What must we do, Kale? What must the Emberwood do?" Kale looked around at the faces of his tribal leaders, their fear palpable, yet beneath it, a nascent flicker of determination. "We gather our strength. We seek the old knowledge. We prepare for a battle that will define our future." The council, though gripped by fear, found a measure of unity in Kale's unwavering resolve. The decision was made. The tribe would no longer deny the ancient threat. They would prepare, they would learn, and they would fight. The whispers of the serpent had become a roar, and the Emberwood, against all odds, chose to answer it. The first rays of dawn found Kale descending from the watchtower, his face etched with exhaustion, but his eyes burning with a fierce determination. He immediately sought out Elder Maeve and the other tribal elders, their meeting place being the large communal hut, the Heartwood Lodge. The air inside was thick with the smell of morning fire and nervous anticipation. The elders were already gathered, their faces grim, discussions hushed. The tremors of the night had been particularly strong, and the metallic scent of the serpent was now faintly discernible even within the village boundaries. As Kale entered, all eyes turned to him, recognizing the gravity in his silent presence. "I saw it," Kale stated, his voice low but clear, cutting through the tension like a sharpened blade. "The great serpent. It moved along the eastern ridge last night. It is real. It is immense. And it is closer than we imagined." A collective gasp rippled through the council. Despite Maeve's warnings and the mounting evidence, the direct confirmation, spoken with such conviction by their guardian, struck a chord of profound fear. Some elders covered their mouths, others bowed their heads in silent despair. Elder Theron, a venerable warrior with scars that told tales of countless battles, pounded his staff on the ground. "Impossible. The legends speak of it banished, locked away. It cannot simply return." "The earth breathes Theron," Maeve interjected, her voice calm but firm. "And with its breath, the ancient things stir. Kale has seen the truth. His spirit is pure, his vision unclouded." She looked at Kale, her eyes communicating deep understanding. "Tell them, Guardian. Tell them what you truly felt, not just what you saw." Kale took a deep breath, steadying his resolve. "It is not merely a beast, elders. It is a force. A living, ancient power that seeks to consume. Its presence brings a cold dread, a profound imbalance to the forest. It shattered trees without effort. It moved with a silent, terrifying grace. Our traditional defenses, our hunting spears, they will not suffice." He spoke of the sheer scale of the creature, the deep gouges in the trees, the devastating path it carved, and the overwhelming sense of malevolence it exuded. He emphasized that this was a threat unlike any the Emberwood tribe had ever faced, a challenge that demanded more than just their courage. It demanded their unified will, their ancient wisdom, and perhaps a new kind of weapon. The council members listened, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to a dawning, terrifying understanding. Theron, initially defiant, now sat in stunned silence, his knuckles white around his staff. The weight of Cal's words, coupled with Maeve's unwavering support and the escalating signs, broke through their disbelief. "So, what then, Guardian?" asked Elder Anya, her voice trembling slightly. "Do we flee? Do we abandon our ancestral lands?" Kale met her gaze, his own resolute. "We do not flee. We are the Emberwood. This is our home. We stand, but we must prepare. We must understand. Maeve has spoken of old lore, of ways to fight this darkness. We must delve into those forgotten paths." After a long, tense silence, Elder Theron finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. "He is right. The signs are too many, the testimony too clear. This is not a matter for debate, but for survival. What must we do, Kale? What must the Emberwood do?" Kale looked around at the faces of his tribal leaders, their fear palpable, yet beneath it, a nascent flicker of determination. "We gather our strength. We seek the old knowledge. We prepare for a battle that will define our future." The council, though gripped by fear, found a measure of unity in Kale's unwavering resolve. The decision was made. The tribe would no longer deny the ancient threat. They would prepare, they would learn, and they would fight. The whispers of the serpent had become a roar, and the Emberwood, against all odds, chose to answer it. With the Heartwood spear forged and pulsing with latent power, Kale knew his task was far from over. A weapon, however legendary, was only as effective as the hand that wielded it. The great serpent was not merely a large beast. It was an ancient, cunning intelligence, a force of primal chaos. To face it, Kale needed to transcend his already formidable skills, to become something more than just a guardian. He needed to become a living weapon himself. He dedicated himself to an intense, grueling regimen of training, unlike anything he had ever undertaken. His days began before dawn, running through the jungle paths, his speed and endurance pushed to their absolute limits. He practiced with the heartwood spear relentlessly, its unique balance and weight demanding new forms of movement. He learned to wield it not just as a thrusting weapon, but as an extension of his own body, a graceful, deadly dance. Elder Maeve guided his spiritual training, teaching him ancient meditations that sharpened his mind and deepened his connection to the forest spirits. She taught him to anticipate, not just react, to read the subtle shifts in the air, the vibrations in the earth, the unseen currents of energy that flowed through the world. He learned to quiet his own thoughts, to become an empty vessel, allowing intuition to guide his movements. He spent hours in mock combat with the tribe's most skilled warriors, men and women who had faced countless dangers. They used blunt spears and staffs, simulating the serpent's immense coils and crushing attacks. Kale practiced dodging, weaving, and finding openings, learning to identify vulnerabilities in imaginary foes of impossible size. Rorik, the tracker, helped Kale to understand the serpent's likely movements, its patterns of attack and retreat based on the devastation it left behind. Lyra, the swift huntress, taught him agility, how to move through the dense jungle canopy with impossible speed and silence, a skill that might be vital in dodging the serpent's massive strikes. The entire tribe watched Kale's training with a mix of awe and trepidation. Children would gather at the edge of the clearing, their eyes wide as they watched their guardian leap and spin, the heartwood spear a blur in his hands. The adults, their faces grim, understood the gravity of his task. Their hope, their very survival, rested upon his shoulders. Kale pushed past the limits of exhaustion, his muscles aching, his spirit sometimes faltering under the immense pressure. There were moments of doubt, of fear, where the sheer impossibility of fighting such a foe threatened to overwhelm him. But each time he would remember the faces of his people, the serene beauty of the Emberwood village, the ancient wisdom of Maeve, and the memory of the great serpent's terrifying shadow. He would rise again, renewed by an unwavering resolve. He knew the serpent would attack again, and soon. The tremors were growing stronger, the metallic tang in the air more pungent. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Kale had to be ready. He had to be more than ready. He had to become the embodiment of his tribe's will to survive, a living shield against the ancient darkness. His body, his mind, his spirit, all were honed to a single, sharp point of determination, ready to meet the unthinkable challenge head-on. The training was a crucible, burning away weakness and forging an unbreakable core of courage within him. With the council's reluctant but firm decision, the village shifted its focus from uneasy waiting to frantic preparation. While warriors strengthened defenses and scouts kept vigilant watch, Kale and Elder Maeve retreated to the seclusion of Maeve's hut, determined to unearth the ancient lore that might hold the key to their survival. The hut, usually a place of quiet contemplation, was transformed into a veritable library of ancient knowledge. Maeve pulled out scrolls made from treated bark, intricately carved wooden tablets, and bundles of dried animal skins etched with symbols and cryptic writings. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced the small window, illuminating the forgotten wisdom contained within. Our ancestors faced this darkness before, Kale, Maeve explained, her voice a low murmur as she carefully unrolled a fragile, ancient scroll. They did not defeat it with brute force alone, but with wisdom, with spirit, and with a weapon forged from the heart of our lands. They spent days poring over the texts, deciphering forgotten languages and interpreting symbolic imagery. Kale, with his keen mind and deep connection to the forest, proved an invaluable aid, often intuiting meanings that Maeve had to ponder. They learned of the serpent's immense power, its near invulnerability to conventional weapons, and its chilling ability to sap the life from the land. But amidst the grim warnings, they found faint glimmers of hope. The texts spoke of a specific weakness, a pulsating core of dark energy beneath its scales, hidden deep within its colossal body, only briefly exposed during its most powerful attacks. It was a fleeting target, requiring impossible precision and immense speed. More importantly, the lore detailed the Heartwood Spear. This was no ordinary weapon, but a legendary artifact, a spear said to be forged from the core of the mother tree itself, imbued with the life force of the forest and the spirits of the ancestors. The legends described it as having the power to pierce the serpent's defenses, to strike at its vulnerable core. The Heartwood Spear, Maeve murmured, tracing a finger over a depiction of the weapon on a crumbling scroll. It is not merely wood and stone, Kale. It is a conduit. It channels the very essence of life against the essence of chaos. The process of forging such a spear was complex and arduous, requiring not just skilled hands, but a pure heart and a deep spiritual connection. It demanded wood from a tree that had witnessed 1,000 seasons, a shard of obsidian from the highest lightning-struck peaks, and feathers from the sacred thunderbird, a creature rarely seen. And most crucially, it required the infusion of a spirit, a guardian's unwavering will, to guide its power. Kale felt a mix of awe and trepidation. The scale of the challenge was immense. To find these rare components, to forge such a legendary weapon, and then to wield it against a creature of unimaginable power, it seemed an impossible task. Yet, as he read the ancient words, he felt a surge of ancient power within himself, a connection to the guardians who had come before him. The text also spoke of rituals, of ancient chants, and of ways to understand the serpent's movements, to anticipate its attacks. Maeve began teaching Kale these forgotten practices, guiding him through meditations and spiritual exercises that sharpened his senses and honed his intuition. The knowledge they uncovered was daunting, revealing the true magnitude of the threat. But it also offered a path, however narrow and perilous, towards victory. As Kale looked at the flickering firelight illuminating the ancient writings, he knew his destiny was now inextricably linked with the fate of the Emberwood. He was not just a guardian. He was a vessel for the ancient wisdom, a warrior chosen to wield the Heartwood Spear and face the darkness that threatened to consume their world. The inevitable arrived with the brutal swiftness of a predator. It was a night of heavy, oppressive air, the kind that precedes a storm. But the storm was not of rain, but of destruction. The tremors had been building all day, growing from subtle shivers to violent jolts that made the ancient trees sway. The metallic tang in the air was now so strong it burned the nostrils, a tangible herald of the serpent's approach. Kale was on watch, the Heartwood Spear clutched firmly in his hand, his senses stretched to their breaking point. He stood on the watchtower, gazing into the impenetrable darkness, his heart pounding a relentless rhythm against his ribs. He knew this was it. Suddenly, a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to rip the very fabric of the night, tore through the forest. It was a sound of immense power and ancient rage, a sound that froze the blood in every Emberwood villager's veins. The ground beneath Kale heaved violently, sending him stumbling, but he quickly regained his balance, his eyes fixed on the eastern edge of the village. There, in a terrifying display of raw power, the colossal head of the great serpent of shadow erupted from the earth. It was even more monstrous up close than Kale's distant glimpse had suggested. Its scales, as black as obsidian, gleamed eerily in the faint starlight, and its eyes, glowing with a malevolent, sickly green light, fixed on the village with an ancient, consuming hunger. Its jaws, wide enough to swallow a hut whole, were lined with fangs like polished daggers. The serpent struck with incredible speed, a blur of immense power. Its head crashed down onto the outer perimeter, flattening several huts in an instant, sending splinters of wood and thatch flying into the night. Screams of terror erupted from the villagers as they scrambled for cover, the carefully constructed defenses proving pitifully inadequate against such a force. To arms, defend the village. Kale's voice, amplified by adrenaline, cut through the panic. He leaped from the watchtower, landing lightly, the heartwood spear a beacon of defiance in his hand. He led a small group of warriors, their faces pale but determined, towards the point of attack. Their plan was not to defeat the serpent, not yet, but to drive it back, to buy time for the women, children, and elders to reach the designated emergency shelters deeper in the forest. Kale moved with a speed and agility born of weeks of relentless training. He dodged a sweeping strike of the serpent's head, the wind of its passage ruffling his hair. He thrust the heartwood spear, not to wound, but to distract, aiming for the tough scales of its snout. The spear made a jarring, scraping sound, leaving a faint glowing mark on the serpent's dark hide. The serpent recoiled, surprised by the unexpected resistance, its glowing eyes momentarily focusing on Kale. This was its first mistake. While its attention was on the young guardian, the other warriors, emboldened by Kale's courage, began to launch volleys of flaming arrows and light spears, aiming for its eyes and mouth. These were mere annoyances to the colossal beast, but they bought precious seconds. Kale, seizing the moment, moved swiftly, leading the serpent on a chase, drawing it away from the most populated areas. He used the terrain, ducking behind massive trees, making himself a tantalizing, infuriating target. The serpent, in its ancient rage, lashed out, its coils crushing more huts, its tail sweeping through the jungle, but Kale was always just out of reach. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes, the serpent, frustrated by the agile guardian and the stinging attacks, and perhaps sensing the lack of easy prey, began to retreat. With a final, furious hiss that vibrated through the very ground, it burrowed back into the earth, leaving behind a swath of destruction and a lingering stench of decay. The battle was over for now. The tribe had survived its first direct assault, but the cost was high. Several huts were destroyed and a few warriors were wounded, though miraculously no lives were lost. Kale stood amidst the smoldering ruins, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his spirit unbowed. The serpent had shown its power, but the emberwood had shown its defiance. This was just the beginning.